Do you ever think about those African American cake recipes no one makes anymore and wonder how they slipped away? These cakes once filled Sunday tables and church socials with warmth, pride, and family memory. When did we stop baking them and what faded with them? Pound cake made with evaporated milk was the kind of cake that held families together long before boxed mixes took over. It was dense, silky, and rich in a way that made every slice feel worthy of a gathering, even on an ordinary afternoon. Evaporated milk gave it a smoothness regular milk could not match, a creaminess that tasted like time and care. Older women baked it for homecomings, anniversaries, and repasts, knowing a good pound cake brought comfort without needing anything extra. You did not frost it or dress it up. You just sliced it thick and served it with pride. Every family had someone known for making the best one, someone who never wrote the recipe down because the real steps lived in their hands. But as life sped up and convenience took over, evaporated milk pound cake faded from the table. Today, it appears only at the deepest family events, usually when someone older insists on bringing it back. And when it does, it reminds everyone what real comfort tastes like. Sock-it-to-me cake was the bright, bold spirit of 1970s black kitchens, a cake that made people smile before they even cut into it. It had a cinnamon and brown sugar swirl running through the middle, a playful surprise in a world of plain desserts. Families brought it to reunions and Sunday dinners because it was dependable, tender, and joyful. The glaze on top was simple, but gave the cake a shine that made it feel special. Children loved the swirl, adults loved how well it fed a crowd, and everyone loved how quickly it disappeared. It came from a time when home bakers mixed boxed cake bases with homemade fillings, creating something new without losing tradition. But as tastes changed, this cheerful cake slowly vanished from holiday tables. People forgot the pleasure of slicing into that ribbon of sweetness. Still, for anyone who remembers the 1970s, one look at that swirl brings back kitchens filled with laughter and radio music. Caramel layer cake was the Sunday showpiece of older generations, a dessert built around an icing that demanded patience and devotion. The layers were simple enough, but the caramel icing was where the pride lived. It had to be stirred slowly on the stove, watched closely, and poured at just the right moment before it tightened and turned grainy. Grandmothers guarded that moment like a secret, trusting instincts no recipe could teach. When it finally poured, it coated each layer in a sweetness that tasted deep and warm. On holidays, it sat in the center of the table like a small crown, but the time it required was also what pushed it out of modern kitchens. Few people today want to stand over a stove whispering prayers into a pot of sugar, so caramel layer cake slipped into memory, treasured but rarely made. 7-Up cake was the bright, lemony potluck star of the 1960s and 1970s, the kind of cake you could spot across a crowded church basement just by its golden glow. The soda kept it tender, light, and fragrant, making each bite feel airy but rich at the same time. Mothers baked it because it never failed, because it sliced clean, and because it made the whole house smell like sunshine on a warm afternoon. Some people glazed it with lemon icing, others left it plain. But either way, it was a celebration cake, a cake you brought when you wanted to brighten a room. Children loved the sweetness, adults loved the moisture, and everyone loved that it tasted just as good on day 2 as it did fresh from the oven. But as new dessert trends arrived and soda cakes fell out of fashion, 7-Up cake slowly drifted off the table. Store-bought desserts replaced the homemade ones, and the simple genius of soda-based baking slipped quietly into history. Still, anyone who grew up with it never forgot the first bite, soft and citrusy and impossibly tender, like a little piece of childhood wrapped in foil. $1,000,000 cake was the tall, pineapple-filled refrigerator cake families saved for the biggest moments, birthdays, holidays, or the kind of gatherings where every cousin showed up at once. It was cool, creamy, and towering, a cake that felt luxurious, even though it relied on humble ingredients like crushed pineapple, whipped filling, and soft layers. The magic was not in fancy technique, but in the way the flavors melded overnight, turning simple ingredients into something that felt like celebration itself. Families passed it around at reunions, slid slices onto paper plates, and marveled at how refreshing it tasted in the hot southern months. But as times changed and refrigerator cakes lost their place to trendier desserts, million-dollar cake became rare. Fewer people remembered how the layers softened just enough, how the pineapple brought brightness, or how the cake could feed 20 people without a complaint. Today it survives mostly in handwritten recipe cards tucked inside old cookbooks, waiting for someone to remember how joyful a chilled cake can be. Old-fashioned jam cake was the spice-covered memory keeper of Southern Black families, a cake that used fruit preserves not for decoration but for survival. Before sugar was easy to buy and fresh fruit was available year-round, jam was what sweetened the batter and kept the cake moist. Its color was deep, its flavor warm with spices like cinnamon and clove, and its texture sturdy enough to wrap and travel. Families made it for holidays or long journeys, knowing it could feed many people without spoiling the tang of the jam mixed with the spices, to create a flavor that felt both practical and celebratory. Grandmothers often used whatever preserves they had: blackberry, peach, fig, giving each cake a personality shaped by the land and the season. But as modern desserts overtook old ones and store-bought treats became easier, jam cake faded. Few people today know the quiet satisfaction of slicing into something sweetened by a summer harvest kept through winter. Its memory still lingers, though, in the kitchens, where frugality was always matched by creativity. Coconut sheet cake was the snowy, tender celebration cake that marked Easter, Christmas, and any Sunday when the whole family filled the house. Fresh grated coconut gave it a softness and smell that no bagged version can match, and older women took pride in the time it took to shred every piece by hand. The cake baked light and pale, then cooled beneath a blanket of frosting that held the coconut like the first snowfall of the year. Families cut it into squares and served it on paper plates after church services, reunions, or holidays that stretched late into the afternoon. But fresh coconut was work. Real work, and as shortcuts filled the grocery aisles, the old version disappeared. Today, most people have only tasted the boxed version, but those who remember the real one can still feel the cool sweetness and hear the scrape of a coconut being cracked open on the kitchen counter. Chess cake squares were the dense, buttery dessert bars that filled school fundraisers, bake sales, and family events with a sweetness that stuck to your fingers. They were made from simple ingredients: cream cheese, butter, sugar, and a soft base that baked into something rich enough to satisfy a crowd. Mothers made them because they traveled well, sliced neatly, and tasted even better the next day. Children circled the table hoping to grab the corner pieces, where the edges caramelized into a golden chew. But as more modern desserts took over and school functions changed, chess cake squares slipped out of rotation. Their simplicity became overshadowed by trendier treats, and fewer people remembered how effortless and comforting they could be. Still, one bite of that sweet, creamy top layer can take you right back to a cafeteria filled with laughter and folding chairs. Hot milk sponge cake was the quiet, airy dessert that older grandmothers baked long before anyone relied on boxed mixes to do the work. The warm milk folded into the batter created a softness that felt almost weightless, a cake so gentle it barely needed frosting. Families served it with berries, whipped cream, or just powdered sugar dusted lightly on top. It was the dessert you made when you wanted something delicate but not too sweet, something that felt homemade without shouting for attention. As baking trends shifted toward richer and heavier desserts, this tender sponge cake faded. People forgot how satisfying a light cake could be, how its simplicity made room for conversation and company. Yet in the quiet kitchens where older women still measure by instinct, hot milk sponge cake lives on like a whispered tradition. Texas sheet cake was the one-pan wonder that fed entire church crowds without ever looking complicated. Baked thin in a large pan, poured with warm chocolate icing while still hot, it created a glossy top that cracked slightly as it cooled. Families carried it to potlucks, picnics, and homecomings because it sliced clean and stretched far. It was the cake you made when you needed something dependable, something that tasted rich but never felt heavy. Children remembered the warm icing dripping down the sides of the pan, Adults remembered how one cake could feed 30 people. Yet as gatherings changed and dessert tables grew more elaborate, Texas sheet cake drifted off the holiday menus. But anyone who grew up with it can still close their eyes and remember the taste, soft, chocolatey, and shared with a room full of people you loved. Old Southern tea cake loaf was the soft, tender slice elders brought out when someone knocked on the door without warning. It was not a cookie like people imagine today, but a pale loaf flavored with vanilla, nutmeg, or lemon, baked for the purpose of hospitality itself. In many African American homes, it sat wrapped in wax paper because you never knew when a neighbor or cousin might stop by. It did not need frosting because the comfort lived in the crumb, in the way it broke gently beside a cup of tea or coffee. Older women baked it on quiet afternoons, humming while the kitchen filled with the smell of butter and sugar warming together. Children knew the first slice went to guests, but they waited for the end pieces, soft and sweet with extra browning. As visits became planned and store-bought desserts replaced homemade ones, this simple loaf faded. Younger generations forgot how one cake on the counter could open the door to conversation and connection. Today, it appears mostly in stories from elders who remember kitchens that always smelled warm and welcoming. Yet one bite is still enough to bring back low voices talking in the next room, coffee brewing on the stove, and a home that stayed ready to open its door. Black walnut cake was the deep, earthy holiday treasure elders guarded like something sacred. Black walnuts were hard to crack, hard to clean, and their flavor was bold in a way nothing else could mimic. That difficulty made the cake feel special, almost ceremonial, especially in winter when families gathered in warm, crowded kitchens. Many African American households saved it for Christmas because preparing the nuts took real time and real patience. Children helped crack shells on porches while older relatives sifted out the tiny pieces inside. The cake baked into a rich, smoky sweetness that store-bought desserts never touched, a flavor tied to laughter and tradition. But as black walnuts became scarce and expensive, families stopped baking it, and younger generations never understood the difference regular walnuts could not make up for. Now the true version is rare, kept alive mostly by older cooks in rural towns. Yet anyone who remembers it can still summon the taste, a flavor as proud and irreplaceable as the people who once made it by hand. Molasses spice cake was the warm, thrifty dessert that carried African American families through lean years, long before sugar was cheap or bakeries were crowded with choices. Made from molasses, spices, and a little fat, it baked into something far richer than anyone expected from such simple ingredients. During the Depression and well into the 1960s, molasses was the sweetener families trusted because it was affordable and always on hand. Spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger turned the batter into a dark, fragrant cake that tasted like comfort and endurance. Children believed this was what holidays were meant to taste like: warm, dense, deeply flavored. Slices traveled to neighbors, church gatherings, and school lunches. But as sugar grew cheaper and new desserts became popular, molasses cake faded from view. Younger cooks dismissed it without realizing how much history lived inside that dark sweetness. Today it sits mostly in old handwritten recipes, waiting for someone to bring it back. For those who grew up with it, no modern cake replaces the steady comfort it offered during hard times. Butter rum pound cake was the cozy winter gift passed from neighbor to neighbor when the cold settled in and holidays drew near. It was a golden cake infused with butter, sugar, and a splash of rum flavoring that made the whole house smell like warmth. African American families baked it as a gesture of care, wrapping slices in foil and delivering them to friends, church elders, or anyone who needed a little seasonal cheer. The cake baked dense and smooth, with a delicate rum glaze poured over the top while still warm. It felt festive without being showy, sweet without being overwhelming, and welcoming in a way only homemade cakes can be. Children knew this was a grown folks' cake meant for company, not for running in and out of the kitchen grabbing pieces. Over the years, as neighborhoods changed and door-to-door visiting became less common, the tradition of gifting pound cakes softened. Store-bought treats took their place, and butter rum pound cake faded into memory. But anyone who has tasted its buttery sweetness knows it carries the quiet magic of community and care. Banana nut sheet cake was the practical, tender solution to a kitchen full of ripening bananas, the kind that spotted faster than families could eat them. Instead of wasting the fruit, older cooks mashed them into cake batter, folded in nuts, and baked the mixture in a large pan that always came out moist and fragrant. This sheet cake was soft, comforting, and topped with cream cheese frosting if the household had the ingredients on hand. It became a favorite for birthdays, potlucks, and late-night gatherings because it fed a crowd without much trouble. The flavor felt homespun, not fancy, but deeply satisfying with every bite. Children scraped frosting off the corners, adults appreciated its simplicity, and everyone loved how the bananas kept the cake tender for days. But as boxed banana breads and store-bought pastries became common, homemade banana nut sheet cake slowly disappeared. The younger generations lost touch with the joy of turning nearly spoiled fruit into something celebratory. Still, those who remember the smell of bananas warming in the oven know this cake carried a sweetness no bakery can match. Molasses stacked cake graced weddings and homecomings with a sweetness born of patience and skill. Thin layers of spiced cake were baked individually, then stacked high with a rich molasses filling that soaked into the crumb as the dessert rested overnight. The dark syrup lent a deep flavor that spoke of both Caribbean cane fields and southern kitchens. Families often baked the layers days ahead, turning the assembly into a festive gathering where aunts and cousins worked side by side. Each slice told a story of celebration and endurance, for molasses was affordable and plentiful even when other sweeteners were scarce. The cake's tall, impressive stature made it a centerpiece on tables decorated for special occasions, a symbol of abundance even in lean times. Today, few households take the time to roll, bake, and stack so many delicate layers, and the recipe lives mostly in old family cookbooks. Those who have tasted it know the quiet triumph of a dessert that rewards effort with lasting memory. Hummingbird cake was a dessert tied to African American gatherings in the South, combining bananas, pineapple, and spices into a moist, flavorful cake. It was generously frosted with cream cheese icing, making it rich and indulgent without being overly complicated. The fruit gave the cake natural sweetness and kept it tender, while the spices added warmth. Families served it at reunions, weddings, and Sunday dinners, where it became a centerpiece dessert that drew compliments. Hummingbird cake was often passed around in large slices, meant to be shared and enjoyed together. Its popularity soared during the mid-20th century, but over time it has quietly faded from many kitchens. Though still remembered in Southern cookbooks, it rarely appears on modern tables, overshadowed by trendier desserts. Yet those who recall it know it carried a spirit of celebration, a cake that symbolized abundance and care. Hummingbird cake remains one of those recipes that tells a story of hospitality and joy, baked with both fruit and tradition. Caramel cake was the showstopper of every Sunday table, a golden beauty that looked like celebration and tasted like devotion. Mama would stand by the stove, stirring sugar and butter until it turned just the right shade of amber, never letting it burn. The caramel frosting had to be watched, whispered to, and poured at the perfect moment, too soon, and it ran thin, too late, and it stiffened like candy. But when she got it right, it draped over soft yellow layers like satin. The cake was tender, buttery, and rich enough to make conversation stop mid-sentence. Folks cut it carefully, as though it might disappear if handled wrong. The sweetness clung to your teeth, the flavor to your heart. Caramel cake was not just dessert. It was a skill, a tradition, a gift that proved patience could taste like perfection. It was the dessert everyone waited for and nobody refused. Long after the plates were empty, people still talked about that frosting, shiny as glass and sweet as memory. It was a labor of love and proof that the best things in life take time, attention, and a steady hand stirred by care. Prune cake was a thrifty dessert that turned what many considered a humble ingredient into something rich and satisfying. African American families stewed prunes until soft, then blended them into a spiced cake batter filled with cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. The prunes gave the cake a deep sweetness and moist texture that lasted for days, making it perfect for large households or gatherings. It was served plain or dusted with powdered sugar, sometimes with a drizzle of simple icing when resources allowed. Prune cake was practical because prunes kept well in pantries and were affordable compared to fresh fruit. Families valued it not just for thrift but also for comfort, since its flavor carried warmth and familiarity. It was often baked during holidays or shared at church events, where its rich aroma filled kitchens with anticipation. Today, the cake is rarely seen, dismissed unfairly by modern tastes. Yet it was once beloved, a reminder that clever cooks could transform simple ingredients into something extraordinary. Prune cake stood as proof that desserts were about heart as much as luxury. Pineapple upside-down cake was pure Sunday sunshine baked in a skillet. Mama would melt butter and brown sugar first, letting it bubble just enough to coat the bottom before laying perfect golden rings of pineapple in place. A bright red cherry sat in the center of each ring, like jewels in a crown. The batter poured on top was thick and sweet, sealing the fruit in a sugary glaze that caramelized as it baked. When it flipped out of the pan, everyone held their breath until it landed, glistening, golden, and smelling like heaven. The cake was soft and airy, the fruit sticky and rich, a dance of sweet and tart that no one could resist. Served warm with a dollop of cream, it was the definition of show-stopping simplicity. You could taste the pride in every bite, proof that beauty could rise out of everyday things. Pineapple upside-down cake was more than dessert. It was an event. Families made it to celebrate, to impress, or simply to make Sunday feel extra sweet. The first slice always drew applause, the last one quiet sighs. It was the kind of dessert that made an ordinary meal feel like a moment worth remembering. Blackberry jam cake was a dense, spiced dessert that once filled African-American homes with its rich aroma. Made with cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg, the cake was moistened with blackberry jam stirred right into the batter. It baked into a dark, fragrant loaf that sliced thick and tasted of both fruit and spice. Families prized it because it made use of homemade jam, often prepared from wild blackberries gathered in summer. This meant the dessert carried not only flavor, but also the memory of foraging and preserving. It was a cake served on special occasions, sometimes frosted but often left plain to let the jam speak for itself. The spices gave it depth, while the jam kept it moist for days, making it a practical choice in lean times. Blackberry jam cake represented tradition, resourcefulness, and the pleasure of stretching summer's harvest into winter. Though it has nearly vanished from tables today, it stands as one of those unforgettable creations that carried both history and heart in every bite. Coconut layer cake was the grand finale of any Sunday spread, tall and proud with frosting as white as a new tablecloth. Mama cracked coconuts by hand, saving every drop of milk and shaving the meat fine with patience born of love. The layers were soft and buttery, each one stacked carefully, then covered in billows of sweet icing that clung like snow. Every forkful carried a tender sweetness, rich but never heavy, with the faint crunch of fresh coconut catching the light. It was a cake made for special days, Easter, homecomings, or when company came calling. You could taste the care in every bite, the kind that took all afternoon but felt worth every minute. Children waited by the counter for stray flakes to fall, while grown folks admired the cake like art before slicing. It was the kind of dessert that silenced a table, not out of manners but awe. Coconut layer cake was not just food, it was ceremony, celebration, and memory covered in white. Even days later, the leftovers stayed moist, the frosting soft and forgiving. A slice of it could turn any Sunday into something sacred, proof that beauty could come from nothing more than butter, sugar, and heart. Black walnut pound cake carried the wild woods straight into the holiday kitchen with a perfume unlike any other. Foragers collected the hard-shelled nuts each autumn, cracking them carefully to release the dark, robust kernels inside. The cake batter, rich with butter and eggs, absorbed the strong, earthy flavor of the walnuts, baking into a loaf dense enough to slice thin and savor slowly. Served at Christmas or family reunions, the cake announced both celebration and the success of gathering nature's bounty. Children helped shell the nuts, their hands stained brown from the husks, a seasonal badge of honor. Neighbors traded slices wrapped in wax paper as gifts, spreading cheer through the community. Today, imported walnuts and commercial cakes have replaced the ritual, but the memory of that deep, almost smoky taste lingers for those who once enjoyed a slice with coffee while snow fell outside and the house smelled of spice and toasting nuts. Chocolate mayonnaise cake was the dessert that turned thrift into pure genius. Born from lean times, it replaced milk and butter with mayonnaise, adding moisture that made every bite rich and velvety. Mama would mix cocoa and sugar into the batter until it looked like silk, then pour it into pans that smelled faintly of Sunday roast. The cake rose dark and even, its texture soft as a secret. Once cooled, it got topped with thick fudge frosting, whipped by hand, shiny enough to catch the light. Nobody believed mayonnaise could make something taste that good, but one bite erased all doubt. The flavor was deep, not too sweet, with a smoothness that made you close your eyes for just a second longer. Chocolate mayonnaise cake reminded folks that creativity could taste better than luxury. It was humble, clever, and downright delicious, a symbol of how resourceful hands could turn anything into something worth celebrating. Served after Sunday dinner, it always disappeared before the coffee cooled. Every crumb carried history, heart, and a reminder that love, like good cake, needs no fancy ingredients, just faith in what you have and a reason to share it. Carrot pineapple cake was the fruit-forward potluck powerhouse that once ruled church basements and fellowship halls. It was moist, dense, and full of grated carrots, crushed pineapple, and sometimes pecans, bound together in a batter that baked into something richer than the ingredients implied. African-American families made it for large gatherings because one pan fed many people, and its flavor felt bright even in the coldest months. The cream cheese frosting was the finishing touch, smooth and tangy, spreading easily across the top. This cake traveled well, sliced neatly, and stayed moist for days, qualities any church cook valued deeply. But as grocery stores filled with bakery cakes and celebrations shifted, carrot pineapple cake faded into the background. Fewer home bakers grated carrots by hand or opened cans of pineapple just for one recipe. Yet those who remember sharing slices after long Sunday services still talk about its tender crumb and gentle sweetness. One bite tasted like fellowship, community, and a time when potluck tables stretched farther than anyone could see. Applesauce spice cake was the resourceful dessert that helped families stretch ingredients during tight years, turning a jar of applesauce into something tender and warmly spiced. It baked up soft, fragrant, and comforting, flavored with cinnamon, nutmeg, and a richness that belied its thriftiness. African-American mothers relied on it when fresh apples were too expensive or when sugar needed to be used sparingly. The applesauce kept the cake moist for days, making it perfect for school lunches, church dinners, or long weeks when every bit of food had to last. The cake did not need frosting. Its flavor was satisfying enough on its own. Over time, as convenience foods took over and applesauce lost its place in home baking, this humble dessert drifted out of memory. But older generations remember how it filled the house with the smell of comfort and stability. It was proof that even during hard times, sweetness could still be made from simple things. Old-fashioned burnt sugar cake was the labor of love that only the most patient elders attempted, a cake whose flavor came from caramelizing sugar slowly until it reached a deep amber color. The caramel was stirred into the batter, giving the cake a warm, almost smoky sweetness that set it apart from anything else on the table, making it required attention and skill. Burn the sugar too much and it turned bitter, too little, and the flavor fell flat. Families respected the bakers who mastered it, knowing the cake represented tradition, memory, and the kind of cooking done without rushing. The frosting, often made from the same caramel base, coated the cake in a glossy layer that melted on the tongue. Over time, as people moved toward easier recipes, burnt sugar cake faded from holiday spreads. Younger bakers found it intimidating, and many never tasted the original to understand why elders loved it so fiercely. Today it survives mostly in faded notebooks and stories told across kitchen tables. But for those who remember that first bite, the flavor was unforgettable, bold, warm, and full of the past. Coconut cake was the tall, white, winter bright dessert covered in soft flakes that clung to the frosting like new fallen snow, making it one of the most beautiful desserts on any reunion table. The cake layers baked into soft, tender rounds that held moisture well, especially when brushed lightly with sweet coconut milk or simple syrup to deepen the flavor. The frosting was smooth and fluffy, often made from cooked icing or whipped cream cheese depending on the family recipe, and once spread across the cake, it formed the perfect base for the final snowy coating. Handfuls of coconut were pressed gently against the sides, falling lightly across the top until the cake looked like something crafted for celebration. Its flavor was light sweet and refreshing, offering a cool softness that balanced the heavier, richer desserts around it. Coconut cake tasted like reunions. Church gatherings and holidays rolled into one dessert as children reached for it. First drawn to the snowy look while adults reached for it last, wanting to savor the gentle sweetness. In the 1960s, Fatback and cabbage was a reminder that flavor did not come from abundance, but from knowing how to cook with care. It was a dish that taught respect for every part of the animal and every leaf from the garden. Pork, fatback, and cabbage turned scraps into sustenance. Vegetable pot pie with biscuit crust was one of the cleverest ways to turn leftovers into a comforting meal. My grandmother gathered whatever vegetables were left from the week, beans, carrots, peas, or turnips, and simmered them in a simple gravy. She poured the mixture into a dish and covered it with biscuit dough instead of pie crust, which baked into a golden, fluffy topping. The result was hearty, filling, and deeply satisfying, stretching scraps into something that felt like a Sunday supper. Each slice carried both thrift and comfort, a reminder that nothing from the kitchen was wasted. The biscuit crust gave the dish substance, making it a true dinner instead of just a side. In the 1960s, vegetable pot pie with biscuit crust was common across homes that relied on ingenuity, turning odds and ends into meals that filled plates and warmed hearts. It was survival, wrapped in comfort. Food that told the story of resourceful families making the most of what they had. Black walnut pound cake carried the wild woods straight into the holiday kitchen with a perfume unlike any other. Foragers collected the hard-shelled nuts each autumn, cracking them carefully to release the dark, robust kernels inside. The cake batter, rich with butter and eggs, absorbed the strong, earthy flavor of the walnuts, baking into a loaf dense enough to slice thin and savor slowly. Served at Christmas or family reunions, the cake announced both celebration and the success of gathering nature's bounty. Children helped shell the nuts, their hands stained brown from the husks, a seasonal badge of honor. Neighbors traded slices wrapped in wax paper as gifts, spreading cheer through the community. Today, imported walnuts and commercial cakes have replaced the ritual, but the memory of that deep, almost smoky taste lingers for those who once enjoyed a slice with coffee while snow fell outside and the house smelled of spice and toasting nuts. Wild rice pudding combined indigenous grains with African-inspired preparation to create a dish both nourishing and subtly sweet. Wild rice grew naturally in shallow lakes and slow rivers, and enslaved families near these wetlands harvested the dark grains with paddles and baskets, drying them in the sun for year-round use. Cooked slowly in water until tender, the rice was stirred with a bit of sorghum syrup or honey if available, making a warm pudding that supplied protein and lasting energy. Its nutty flavor and satisfying texture turned a simple bowl into a special treat, especially when fresh fruit or spices could be added. This recipe carried forward after emancipation as African American cooks continued to value wild rice for festive meals and family gatherings. Modern chefs still celebrate its earthy richness, but the story behind wild rice pudding honors the blend of native and African foodways that sustained people through scarcity and created a dessert that is at once humble and deeply rooted in the shared history of America's wetlands and kitchens. Banana pudding with vanilla wafers was the dessert that always arrived in the biggest glass dish, the one carried with two hands because it was filled to the top with layers of comfort history and family pride. Grandmothers lined the bottom with vanilla wafers and then poured warm homemade custard over them, letting the cookies soften slowly until they became part of the pudding itself. Tender, sweet, and soaked with flavor. Sliced bananas were tucked between the layers in soft, pale rounds, adding freshness that lifted the sweetness and made the dish feel alive. More custard came next, then more wafers, and then another layer again until the dish was nearly overflowing. Some finished it with whipped topping, while others insisted on meringue browned in the oven until the peaks turned golden. When the dish hit the reunion table, spoons clattered against bowls and children rushed forward because everyone knew banana pudding disappeared fast. It tasted like childhood afternoons, like front porches, like kitchens filled with steam and voices talking over one another while dessert chilled in the refrigerator. Banana pudding was beloved not because it was fancy, but because every family made it slightly differently and each version carried its own memories. It was the dessert that united generations one scoop at a time. Chicken wing stew was one of those meals that would surprise modern ears, since wings were once the cheapest part of the bird. My grandmother bought them in bulk when she could, piling them into pots with onions, celery, and carrots. Slowly simmered, the wings gave up their fat and flavor, turning thin broth into rich gravy. She thickened it with flour or cornstarch, serving it hot over rice or bread to stretch it even further. It was messy eating, but no one complained because the taste was so comforting. Wings may be prized today, but in the 1960s they were scraps, turned into nourishment by clever hands. She said every part of the bird had value if you treated it with respect. Chicken wing stew carried the spirit of thrift, transforming what others dismissed into something that filled the house with warmth. It was proof that good cooking did not depend on wealth, only patience and care. Okra fritters, also known as okra cakes, offered crisp golden edges and a tender interior that celebrated the summer garden. Fresh okra pods were chopped fine, mixed with cornmeal, onions, and a dash of pepper, then spooned into hot oil until each patty puffed and browned. Sold at fish fries, church picnics, and traveling fairs, these fritters were easy to eat by hand and full of flavor that tied African heritage to southern soil. The okra gave a subtle sweetness and a soft binding that kept the patties moist while the cornmeal crust provided satisfying crunch. Children waited impatiently beside bubbling skillets, hoping for the first fritter to cool enough to taste. Vendors wrapped them in newspaper cones so families could stroll through evening air scented with music and spice. Modern snack foods have replaced these handcrafted treats, but those who remember the sound of oil popping and the taste of garden-fresh okra know the fritters carried more than flavor. They held the joy of gathering and the pride of turning humble crops into a festival of taste. Pine needle tea offered a bright and restorative drink when fresh produce was scarce during cold months. Enslaved foragers collected the youngest green needles from longleaf and loblolly pines, rinsed them carefully, and steeped them in hot water until the brew released a light citrus aroma. Rich in vitamin C, this tea helped ward off scurvy and brought a welcome freshness to winter diets heavy with salt-preserved foods. The practice echoed both indigenous traditions and West African herbal knowledge, merging two continents' wisdom into a single sustaining cup. Families continued to brew pine needle tea well after emancipation, and it remains popular among modern herbalists for its gentle flavor and reputed immune-boosting qualities. Its evergreen scent and warm golden color remind us that even in the most barren season, the forest offered nourishment. Pine needle tea illustrates how observing the land and respecting its cycles allowed people to find both medicine and comfort, turning what others overlooked into a sustaining daily ritual that strengthened body and spirit alike. Chess pie was the pantry-friendly reunion dessert that proved simple ingredients could create something unforgettable with only a few motions of a practiced hand. Eggs, sugar, buttermilk, and a scoop of cornmeal mixed into a smooth, pale filling that baked into a golden top with a delicate crackle and a custard center that tasted sweet, warm, and familiar. The pie needed no fruit, no glaze, no decoration, because its flavor stood strong on its own, carrying a richness that came from the balance of creamy custard and a hint of cornmeal texture. At reunions, chess pie sat quietly beside the fancier desserts, but it never stayed untouched because those who knew it understood its power. Each slice tasted like tradition thrift and the creativity of cooks who made something special from what they had on the shelf. Fish head stew was a dish born out of necessity, yet it carried surprising depth and flavor. Fish heads, often discarded by others, were simmered slowly with onions, potatoes, and rice until they yielded every ounce of richness to the broth. My grandmother insisted the heads made the stew better than fillets, providing body and nourishment that nothing else could. The bones and skin flavored the liquid until it turned hearty and comforting. Potatoes stretched the meal, rice thickened it, and vegetables added substance, turning scraps into a filling supper. The taste was strong, earthy, and unforgettable, reminding everyone that no part of food should go unused. For Black families in the 1960s, fish head stew was a common way to stretch the catch of the day, ensuring nothing went to waste. It became a lesson in thrift and gratitude, proof that survival demanded creativity. Fish head stew was both humble and mighty, sustaining families through lean times with flavor and tradition. Stewed oxtails with rice gravy brought deep flavor and slow-cooked richness to Sunday tables across many African American communities. Oxtails, once inexpensive and overlooked, were browned in heavy pots and then simmered for hours with onions, garlic, and spices until the meat turned buttery soft. The braising liquid thickened into a silky gravy that clung to each grain of rice, creating a dish that was equal parts comfort and celebration. Families saved this meal for weekends when everyone could gather because patience was essential and conversation flowed while the pot worked its magic. Children sneaked tastes from wooden spoons, drawn by the savory aroma that filled the house from morning until evening. The humble tale, once discarded by butchers, became a centerpiece of pride and ingenuity. Today, rising prices and faster cooking habits mean fewer people take the time to coax such tenderness from a simple cut of beef, but those who remember the meal speak of it as a perfect union of thrift, skill, and the slow rhythm of family life. Maypop fruit mash turned the wild passion fruit of the American South into a rare dessert filled with tropical fragrance. Known as Maypop for the sound of its hollow fruit when stepped on, this native vine produced aromatic yellow fruits that ripened in late summer. Enslaved foragers gathered the fruit, split the rinds, and scooped the bright pulp into a bowl with a drizzle of molasses or honey when such sweeteners were at hand. The result was a naturally tangy treat that needed no cooking and provided a burst of vitamins. The flavor, a cross between citrus and melon, delighted anyone lucky enough to taste it. Even after emancipation, rural families prized maypops for jellies and pies, and the plant remains a cherished wild edible across the Southeast. Maypop fruit mash preserves a memory of fleeting seasonal abundance and the creativity that transformed wild gifts into moments of celebration, proving that even in the harshest circumstances, people found ways to enjoy the bright, unique flavors offered freely by the natural world. Bread pudding with raisins was the warm, thrifty dessert that turned stale bread into something soft, sweet, and unforgettable at every family reunion. Grandmothers tore leftover bread into pieces, soaking them in a mixture of milk eggs, sugar, and vanilla, until each piece absorbed the custard and softened into tender shapes waiting to bake. Raisins were sprinkled throughout, adding tiny bursts of sweetness that plumped up during baking, turning soft and juicy inside the warm pudding. As the dish baked, the top browned into a gentle crust, while the inside stayed soft, creamy, and full of flavor, filling the kitchen with a scent that wrapped around everyone like a blanket. Served warm from the oven, it tasted like comfort, simplicity, and the skill of elders who wasted nothing and created everything from what little they had. Bread pudding reminded families that desserts did not need to be expensive to feel like love. Butter beans and rice were another cheap but comforting meal that carried families through lean times. Butter beans, with their creamy texture, were slow cooked until tender, often flavored with a smoked ham hock or bone if one was available. The smoky taste infused the beans and created a rich broth that poured beautifully over rice. My grandmother used long-grain rice that stretched a pot of beans into enough servings for the whole household. The dish was hearty, filling, and nourishing, feeding both body and spirit. Butter beans were inexpensive compared to meat, yet they carried enough protein to keep families going strong. Children learned to appreciate the soft beans and flavorful broth as part of everyday meals, and adults recognized their value in stretching budgets. It was not a dish of extravagance but of practicality, a dinner that turned cheap staples into something people looked forward to. Butter beans and rice told the story of resilience in kitchens where every penny counted and every plate needed to satisfy. If one of these forgotten cakes reminded you of someone who loved you through their cooking, share it in the comments and tap like and subscribe so we can keep these old kitchen memories alive.